Hello, everyone. If you are joining us on this live stream, you've made it and we've made it. I think we've got 3 of our faces on the screen and it's on YouTube. So I'm calling that a win for the night already. So you have arrived at our live stream event for My First Architecture Job. So I'm Sarah. I run My First Architecture Job. It's a place really born out of a frustration at how hard that transition is in our industry between finishing your studies and jumping into practice. It can be pretty grueling and pretty hard to find the right resources and advice, and there's a lot that you have to learn suddenly. So I thought before I got too old, I wanted to create some resources to really help young architects with that. One of those resources was my book, which I published at the start of this year, and then there was a pandemic and I couldn't have a book launch. So we had this idea, why don't we hold a live event? But it's not very exciting to just have a live book launch by yourself. So I thought, let's make it fun. Let's follow the TV show themed on You Can't Ask That, and let's open up anonymous questions to all of our community of young architects. And you guys submitted more than 70 questions, I think. So by the time we took out the duplicates, we've got 47, I think, we're going to try and work through today. So I'm going to let Warwick and Kyle introduce themselves while we sort of hang around and give people time to join in. And I'm going to hopefully try and add a few links for you in the live chat so that when we mention things, you know where to get to. So while I do that, I'm going to ask Warwick from Mahaley Slocum Architects to talk a little bit about his background and their business. Over to you, Warwick.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I run Mahaley Slocum, a small architecture practice in the inner north in Melbourne with my wife, Erica. We've been going for about 10 years. Our mission is to craft purposeful architecture with joy. That's what we do when we work on houses and education buildings and offices and a whole range of types. I'm also director of Architeam, which is a not-for-profit cooperative, mostly in Victoria, but around Australia, that represents around 770 small Australian architecture practices. And Architeam's mission is to empower and support those practices to thrive. And finally, I host Pamphilo.co, which is Australia's, I think, most widely read business blog for architects.
Yeah, I think it probably is. That's how I first found you, Warwick. I remember there was an article that I'll never forget about the industry hoarding information. It was one where you compared us to the wine industry. And it, I don't know, it really stuck with me how we tend to be a little bit secretive rather than collaborative, but I hope that's changing and we're going to expose a lot of secrets today, I think. Kyle from Successful Archi Student, currently a 3rd year student. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Successful Archi Student, Kyle?
Yeah, so hello everyone, my name's Kyle Cinco. I'm a 3rd year architecture student from South Australia. Over the last 10 months or so, I've been building up a community, as Sarah said. That community is called Successful Archi Student. Really, it's a platform to help students succeed in their education. And it involves a podcast, a heap of videos, interviews with other students and architects such as Sarah. The hour-long interview we had the other week is up on the YouTube channel. And it's a whole lot of things really, but I shall leave it at that.
Yeah, great. There's an absolute wealth of information on Kyle's blog. So if you are a student architect watching, I definitely recommend checking that out. Now, if you are watching us on YouTube and you have a YouTube account and are able to chat, please pop a little wave or a hello in the chat section so we know there's some people watching. And we're going to get into it very shortly. I did say earlier that this was in place of the book launch. So I just want to talk briefly about the book and some special deals that we're going to run on that one. So this is the book. You may have heard of the book 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School. It's a very well-known book and a beautiful book and very well done. And I was thinking one day that there's a lot of things I really didn't learn in architecture school, and that would be a really handy book to have as well. So my peers and I, we got together. Hi, Leah. Thanks for saying hello. And we thought, what are the 101 things that we wish we had known? And we put together what is a pretty succinct book that covers all kinds of things in just a short, punchy page, from business to construction details to self-development, all those kinds of things. Heaps of people saying hello. Daniel, Amber, Chabelle, Fabiana, thank you. So that's the book. It normally retails for $28, but for the next 24 hours, as part of the launch, we're doing a deal, 5% off and free postage anywhere in the world. So to jump on that, I put the link in the description under the video, or you go to myfirstarchitecturejob.com/sale. Okay, we're going to get into it. So we do have a lot of questions to go through. Some of them are going to be quick fire questions where we're just going to punch out a really quick answer for you, where the other ones we will stop and we'll have a bit of a chat and get a bit deeper into that. So we're going to start with some quick fire questions. Question number one, did you feel you had enough knowledge from university to apply to your first job? Warwick, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely not, from a skills perspective. But that's okay. I think that the job of university isn't to teach you how to go through the practical tasks of being an architect. But what it did do was equip me with the most valuable things of all, which was a deep love for the built environment and a sense of personal responsibility for it. And all the rest comes on the job.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think I had enough either, but I also agree that that's mostly fine, because it's better to learn construction knowledge on the job in the area that you're interested in and working in. Otherwise, we would have to dilute what's taught at uni. And it seems that there's already so much packed in there, it would be hard to do it. And that's also why I wrote the book. So that's that one. Quickfire number two, what do you do when your boss asks you to work overtime? I'm going to jump in on this one, and I'd say, well, first of all, you need to understand your rights under your employment award, and ask your boss what their expectations are relating to your overtime and your pay. And if you think those things don't align, I'd suggest you read the Parlour guideline on overtime culture, which I've put a link to in the description, which has some really great advice on how to manage that. Warwick.
Yeah, look, I'd add to that I agree with you. I think that there's knowing what isn't cool, I think, is really important. I would say that an architecture job is project orientated, which means that there's going to be natural rises and falls in the workflow. And as long as these result in modest fluctuations in the amount of time you're working, with maybe a bit of overtime offset by things like a flexible working environment, or your boss being totally fine with you having an hour off in the morning to go to the dentist and that sort of thing, I think that's totally reasonable. I think there is a balance though. And if your boss asks you to work a lot of overtime or little bits of overtime consistently, you should be confident enough to respectfully request appropriate compensation for that.
Totally. Quick fire question number three. How many days a week do you work, and how often do you work overtime hours? Warwick.
Well, look, so Mahaley Slocum is a husband and wife run small business, which probably puts us in the category of working the most number of days and the most amount of overtime of any category of worker, I guess. So I wouldn't say I work 7 days a week, but sometimes I do. Not most of that extra time is not from the studio, it's from home, or dealing with some emails late at night in bed. And it also, I recognize that that's not all bad, because both of us take time out of the 9 to 5 to drop kids off to school and pick them up from school. And so sometimes we're just compensating for the fact that we didn't work 8 hours during the day, 7.5 hours during the day. And so we do that in the evenings instead.
Yes, interesting to hear your answer on that one as a business owner, because I think most people asking would be thinking about it from that employee perspective. So even though I'm the principal architect at Lighthouse Architecture and Science, I am an employee, and during non-COVID times, I'm employed to work 4 days a week. That's just gone up from 3 days a week because I have a toddler. Everyone in our team is offered a 9-day fortnight option, and we work the hours that we are employed to fairly strictly. And if we do overtime, which is fairly rare for me, we do a time in lieu arrangement, or rarely we do pre-approved overtime pay, very rarely. Quickfire question 4, how do I get better at detailing? I'm going to jump in here first and say the easiest way is to work under an architect who's great at detailing and learn from them, and also work with builders that have great construction knowledge and are really good at mentoring as well. What would you add to that, Warwick?
I jotted down a little note, which was practice makes perfect. That's probably the first thing. I'm not sure if that helps if you're not in the workforce yet, but certainly that's a really critical aspect of it. My old boss always used to say that the best way to get better at documentation generally, and detailing is part of that, is to spend time on site with your drawings and seeing firsthand all the mistakes you've made. And so I certainly found that was really true for my early experience. And actually, you know what, my ongoing experience, even today, I'm learning stuff about incorrect documentation when I'm on site dealing with that documentation with the builder.
Yeah, I love working in an industry where we can constantly be learning in that way.
Yeah.
I'm just going to note here, we're not ignoring Kyle because Kyle's an architecture student. We did ask him which questions he wanted to answer, and he will become quite active later on. We're going to take a moment for a couple of trickier questions now. Question number 5, are architecture firms volatile places to work, especially in comparison to other workplaces? Warwick, I know you had a particular answer for this one.
I do, and we did speak about this earlier, and I'm trying to remember if the notes I've taken down are the same things that we discussed. My feeling is that architecture studios might actually be less volatile than other workplaces. I remember when I was a student, I was working in a lot of hospitality, and some of those places were like brutal places to work. One of the great things about architecture is that it's project-based work, means that if you're working on a project, there might be work for years, certainly many months of work. And so it can create a calmness to the rhythm of architecture. Nothing is going to like suddenly explode in your face overnight, or it's rare that that happens. So I think that my experience certainly running an architecture business is that we get the benefit of a much longer time frame for all the things that we do, compared to even a lot of the other consultants that we work with. You know, an engineer might need to work on 10 times as many projects as we do in a year to keep them busy. So there's a lot more volatility in that.
Do you think, Warwick, that the nature of the work that we do, though, being that unfortunately we are often viewed as a luxury service, do you think that element makes us more volatile in times such as now?
Okay, yeah. So look, that's a really important context. So times such as now, when we've got a huge downturn in the economy, and it doesn't even have to be a global pandemic-induced downturn in the economy. It can simply be 2019 when there was a downturn, at least in Melbourne, in the real estate market, which meant that a lot of residential work seemed to be drying up, made it harder for smaller architecture practices, where we provide a luxury service in that context, not in other buildings necessarily, but in the residential sector, it's more of a luxury service, which does make us more likely to be susceptible to those sorts of downturns. Yet again, I think maybe my earlier comments still stand, that if you compare this position we're in compared to anyone in the hospitality or entertainment or events sector right now, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Question number 6, have you ever been bullied at work or treated in an unpleasant way? So I've got a couple of stories for this one. Bullying and harassment are often very subtle. So I've experienced subtle versions of both. And I think what our industry needs to understand is that the subtle, repetitive experiences amount to potentially significant outcomes. I've experienced very subtle bullying in the form of withholding information. I'm referring to my notes a lot through this one because I always get a little bit nervous answering this question. I suspect that this particular senior person wasn't even really doing it consciously, but there was a repeated pattern where any junior staff member that was sort of blossoming into independence was almost sort of a threat to him, perhaps. So a simple example is one day I wanted to check something before I was responding to a consultant. So I went to him to check that with him, and he undermined us picking up the phone in front of me and calling the consultant. Now that seems like a very, very minor thing, but when that pattern is really repeated and when you start to identify it happening to everyone in the office, I do think that is a form of bullying in a way in withholding information. So in my experience, commercial firms with a macho culture are particularly bad for subtle bullying. So you do need to watch out for it and identify it and either call it out or learn to work for it. And certainly there's a lot more overt, terrible bullying happening, but we need to be more aware of the little stuff because it slips past really easily. On the harassment side, sadly, I think it's also really common. One particular incident stands out for me because while it was pretty harmless, it did affect my ability to do my job. So I was a junior graduate and a representative from a supplier that we often used invited our team to a networking event with the rest of the industry. It was a state of origin night. I was really aware at that stage of not letting gender hold me back. I was really determined that it wouldn't hold me back. But I was a bit uncomfortable going. I was pretty new to the team. I knew I was going to be the only female there at that time in that circumstance. So I'd asked if my partner could come along, and there wasn't a spare ticket for him, which was fine. So I pulled out, and I was a bit angry at myself about that until the older rep said to my boss that if I was worried about being lonely, I could come along and share his bed. And I know this because my boss told me. And I tell this story because it's an example of how a simple, pretty stupid, careless comment can be quite significant. I was already nervous about being a young female attending that event, being on a construction site, dealing with these sort of blokey middle-aged teams. But after that moment, the thought of dealing with that rep on site made me feel really uncomfortable and anxious. It also made me feel a bit weird about my boss because he had told me, I think because he thought it was a compliment or something. On the bright side, it just fueled my anger and determination over these issues. And these days I like to think that I'd happily give them both a piece of my mind. So I think those two stories, while they're pretty minor incidents, I want to highlight to young architects that it's often those little things that are perpetuated that we're still pretty blind to. There's a lot of ignorance too in the industry and fuels a lot of related issues. We got some good nights happening over there. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Warwick.
Oh, look, you've covered it very well. I guess being a white man puts me in a position of privilege within a traditionally white male-dominated industry, but it's not. And so that doesn't mean though I'm immune to bullying, and certainly not immune to negative workplaces. I have worked in an architecture studio that was pretty miserable, and it was an unpleasant experience for a long time, and I was working crazy hours and not getting valued for it, and I just didn't really know better. And I look back on that time and I see that as it was an opportunity to learn what not to do. Oh, I've got the whole family coming in now.
That's great. We're showing the reality.
Yeah. It's amazing. I don't recommend that as a way to learn how to like not what to do. It'd be much better if everybody totally lost my train of thought.
No, I know what you were saying. It'd be good if we didn't have to learn by experience in the industry. And it's really up to people in positions of power to stand up and recognise things going on and be open to seeing it, I think. Question number 7, is the industry really inclusive? Why is it so white dominated? How can an overseas architect get a foot in the door? I suspect it's white and male dominated and not very diverse because it's traditionally been an industry aided by privilege, but I think that is really starting to change. I think one of the things that really limits international English as second language job seekers is that communication is just so critical in our industry. And I think a lot of employers get really nervous that maybe if their English isn't excellent, that's going to hold them back. So whenever I get asked this question, I always suggest that anyone in that boat should try and find a job through the networking route rather than blind approaching, because that really gives them a chance to build that relationship and demonstrate their communication skills and personality rather than relying on sort of a blind contact. Anything to add on that, Warwick?
No, beautifully said. I think that, look, I agree with your comments about privilege, and I think Australia is something like 75% white. And so it does mean that that's going to be the status quo, or rather the starting point of any kind of current change. I also agree with you that I feel like certainly in small practice and in Melbourne that is that things like gender and racial diversity are being highlighted now more than they ever were. They certainly weren't when I was a student, and I think that's a great thing. And the work of groups like Parla are really helping to drive that change. And so it doesn't make it easier now. Maybe it'll make it easier in 5-10 years for coming generations of architects. And I think that your comments about networking being a really critical aspect to finding work when it's hard to find work is true for someone coming in from overseas and struggling, just as it is for someone trying to find their first job and struggling.
Yeah, totally. Kyle, I'm not sure, were you adding something to this one?
I'd like to, yeah. I think the two pros here have made it a very valid point, but I just want to tackle that end of the question where it's how can overseas architects get a foot in the door, because I think that's kind of my cup of tea there. But I think it comes back to the basic principles that anyone can use to get a foot in the door. And it comes back to offering something valuable to the places where you want to work. So if you want a job at a particular firm, it's kind of like, what can you offer them that will benefit their business or workplace? Can you offer your times or skills for free? Can you offer to run their social media for them or answer phone calls, tidy up the office, anything that they don't want to do that you can offer for free? And if you do these jobs with enthusiasm and an open mind, I think you'll be creating more opportunities for yourself over the long term. And I think, yeah, that's about it from me.
At the risk of...
Go, Warwick.
At the risk of stoking controversy, I'm really against working for free. And it doesn't get offered much to us, but it has been offered a dozen or two times over the years. And my response always is, we would never accept that. And I recognize that there is a catch-22 at play here, that if all you have is your time and you can give that away for free and it gets you that foot in the door, then why not offer it? My concern with it is that it undervalues your labor, and then it also creates a very potentially creates a very unsustainable working environment for the profession at large. And I've written on this topic a couple of times, both on my blog and on Parler and Architecture AU, particularly around sort of the recent rise of, or sort of awareness of, like a bunch of architects around the world having internships without pay and getting roundly criticised for it. So I sort of encourage anybody who wants to find out more about that to look that stuff up.
Yeah, there's a fine line defined by the Fair Work Ombudsman about the difference between work experience and free work. So you might be able to frame that kind of foot in the door more through work experience. The line is essentially, are you getting more out of it than they are? And as soon as they're getting something out of you, they should pay you. But really on point tips there, Kyle, about working out what you're offering to the firm. I think a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into the firms that they're talking to and what they might be able to offer.
That's a good rebuttal from the both of you as well. It's definitely good to hear that side of the story as well, especially from Warwick.
Yeah. We're going to finish this section with a question 8. How do you maintain a professional relationship with a builder, but also keep them happy? I would say work with good builders who really appreciate professionalism. They do exist. What would you add, Warwick?
Look, I mean, there's potentially an underlying assumption in that question, and that is that architects and builders don't get along. And like any professional relationship, or actually any relationship, of course that's true in some instances, but one of my most treasured relationships in our business is the ones we have with our trusted builders. And where, you know, we've been in practice for 10 years, which is not that long in the world of architecture. And with one of the builders that we've worked with a bunch of times, we're coming up to now project number 6 or 7 with them. And the reason we're doing that is because we have an exceptionally good relationship. It's positive in both directions, and that's built on trust and respect.
Yeah, totally. Just backtracking, we've had a question asked, is it still acceptable to work for free if you're working for a family member, e.g. if you were designing for your parents? That's a really pointy one. And in short, I'd say anyone is a client and all of the same rules apply. Would you agree with that, Warwick?
Well, thanks for that question, Amber. I saw that one pop up and I'm glad you've come back to it, Sarah. I can't say the same thing in this case because our first project was for family and for free. Back before
it's a different issue, isn't it? You're not working for an employer in a business. Yeah.
So look, I think when it comes to family, basically you throw the rule book out, and this is not the only aspect of that. Working for free for, you know, the people who raised you and gave birth to you seems like a pretty reasonable thing to do, but there are other like pointy
how unreasonable.
No, to kind of but it gets complicated as well because there's a risk that youth, you know, I think I've seen it characterized somewhere where one of the risks of working as a student, for instance, for friends or family, or working for family for free, risks a imbalance in the relationship, or an unspoken tension where your parents, let's say, think they're doing you an amazing favor because they're helping you kickstart your career, and you think you're doing them an amazing favor because you're basically providing a highly valuable service for free. And then somehow the relationship gets really tense or broken down because of that misunderstanding. It's been successful for us, and we've worked with a number of family members over the years, some paid, some unpaid. And I think being very clear about expectations and responsibilities is the way to kind of make sure that works for everybody.
Yeah. Hang around, Amber, because we do touch more on this topic more later. And I would just quickly add that working for free doesn't get rid of your liability, and working for free isn't necessarily covering any overheads that you do have if you are sort of freelancing. So you got to keep in mind that you might be running at a loss there, and does that put you under stress and make you make bad decisions? We're going, we've got another comment to Warwick's point about free work undervaluing the labour. How do you guys feel about freelance workers and outsourcing to get work done at lower rates? That's a really good question. A tricky one to answer. Have you got any thoughts on that one, Warwick?
Yeah, we get emails all the time from drafting kind of companies from different parts of the world saying, you know, we can draft for you for cheap rates. And I know that's on the rise at the bigger end of town. I'm super against it because I think architects and architecture is in enough trouble if we start outsourcing a basic function of our local service provision for cheaper rates. It just has the same function of employing people or having people on board for free. It allows me to deliver that service at a cheaper rate and beat my competitors, but then that becomes the new norm. And I think that question goes more broadly to things like, you know, should I buy my book from Booktopia? Should I buy Sarah's book from Booktopia? Or should I buy it directly from Sarah if I can, and then make sure that that money stays on shore, that taxes are paid for it here, which supports, you know, the few dollars of tax goes to supporting so much that we love in this country. And I think it's important to kind of think about the implications of where we spend our money and how. So to answer Sharbil's comment, local freelance workers is a different thing. Like I'm probably paying them more than my own staff, but outsourcing internationally at cheaper rates, I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah, I completely agree with Warwick. So I'm not going to add anything further on that one. We're going to jump into a section now about our own practices and how we work. We're going to run through the next few fairly briefly. Question number 9, how much do you push for sustainability and maximising energy ratings in your practice? Canberra has a minimum 6-star rating, which we all agree is not enough. Is 7-star your absolute minimum? So if you follow me, you know the principal Lighthouse Architecture and Science. My director and our business owner is a building scientist. So yes, our research shows that 7 stars is pretty easy to achieve if you just apply some informed design thinking. And yes, we personally aim for 7 stars on renovations and 8 stars on new builds. But you have to keep in mind that many of our 8-star homes would actually achieve a 9.5-star rating in a milder climate like Sydney. A lot of people don't often understand that. Warwick, your approach to energy efficiency at Mahaley Slocum?
This is something we're trying to get much better at. And I think probably for the last 6 to 12 months or so, I think we've been pushing harder with our clients. Kind of got to the point where, you know, you're doing a bit of cost cutting and there's the marble benches and the solar panels on the chopping block. And it's always the solar panels that get cut. And that we sort of got a bit dismayed by that. And so we're now shooting for a minimum of 7 stars and really encouraging our clients to see that as their responsibility to achieve. And I'm happy to say that I think particularly after the bushfires and with the world's focus on climate change ramping up, people are really more excited about going down that path. And so it's becoming easier to achieve it.
Yeah, nice. Great to hear. Quickfire question 10. How do you keep your ideas fresh and what keeps you motivated in such trying times? Kyle, thoughts on this one?
Yes, this is something that kind of fires me up because I posted a video about this a little while ago, but what I continue to smash over and over is this idea of understanding the brief. And I guess this can be relevant for students, and correct me if I'm wrong, professionals as well. But if you completely understand the brief given to you by your teachers or the clients, and you've done your proper analysis of actually understanding what is being asked of you, then coming up with an idea should be easy. So it's all about that idea of just understanding the brief and what is actually being asked of you.
Yeah,
and
great.
For that second part of the question as well, what keeps me motivated during difficult times? If I'm working on something and I start getting flustered or annoyed and I feel like I'm not moving forward, I'll take a break, come back and write out a small list of smaller tasks that I can begin working on and ticking off. Because instead of looking at, oh, I've got this 60% submission due in 2 weeks, how the hell am I going to do this? Instead, it's kind of just like, I'll break it down into smaller tasks with their own due dates as well. So it's really about understanding your own and setting your own due dates, I guess. And that's, what helps motivate me and keep me moving forward.
Nice. Warwick?
Motivation, participating in things like this keep me motivated. I think that as everyone has become socially distanced, there is the risk that architecture communities, which are often based on face-to-face experiences with each other, start to dissolve a bit. And so through Architeam, we've been running weekly virtual catch-ups where we discuss various issues facing our practices. Things like this. I'm doing another thing in a couple of weeks about the various stimulus packages with the Institute. So I think they're just keeping me motivated because it's reminding me why one of the things I love about architecture, and it's also making me feel like I can still have agency and power to have like a positive influence on things in an environment that is making a lot of people feel pretty powerless.
Yeah. For me, teaching at university, collaborating with other people, and remembering that belief in what we do and what it achieves is what keeps me motivated and keeps ideas fresh. Question 11, why did you choose to study architecture? For me, it presented the best balance between being creative and something scientific, and an ability to follow my interest in sustainability. So that's always been a big driver for me. And I also liked that it was a profession that didn't involve shift work. And that was pointed out to me when I did my year 10 work experience. In a nutshell, that's my answer. Warwick, how about you?
I chose to study architecture because I always wanted to be an architect. I think since I was about 5. I say that and it sounds very lame coming out of my own mouth. I used to draw houses as a kid. And so it was always something I wanted. I have no idea, therefore, why that came about. I would say, and I'm interested to ask this question back to you, Sarah, is the thing that got me into architecture was done from a position of extreme ignorance. Like I had no idea. I love drawing. That was it, probably. And I love drawing houses. So why not be an architect? That seems to be the right thing. And I was good at science and maths and things. But why I'm still interested in architecture is very different. Has that changed for you at all, do you think? Or are you still pretty committed to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I did, when I was interested in studying architecture, I went to the open day for interior design because I had no idea. I thought architects were more like engineers. And very cleverly at the uni, they piggybacked the interior design presentation with the architecture one because they knew, I think, that happened. And I saw the architecture one and I was instantly in. I thought, no, this is what I want to do. And when I had that thought, I organised my own work experience at an architecture firm, which I think is something a lot of people should do because it gave me a much more realistic insight into how the practice worked. So no, I actually think I'm one of the rarities that has had a pretty clear view of how the industry worked and what I wanted to do in it from the start. It took me a bit of time to find a place where I could do that. On to number 12. What frustrated or frustrates you the most at architecture school? Kyle.
Yeah, so this is a tough one for me to answer, I guess, because I don't really like blaming things for something that's gone wrong.
Yeah, you're still in it, so you got to be careful what you say.
Exactly. I think if I were to think of a time where I'm like, oh, I'm frustrated at this, it would be when I'm forced to study something that I think isn't relevant to my future. I'm very much tunnel visioned at where I see myself in the future and the skills I need to get there. And when I'm forced to write a 3,000-word essay on the difference between, say, modernity, modernism, and what was the other one? Modernization. It kind of just frustrates me in the sense that I don't really know why I'm doing it and they don't really tell me why I'm doing it. But I think as a university, it's focused at teaching a mass of students, and so individually it's going to be hard to tailor to those specific needs. But I understand that, well, I guess that's maybe something else that frustrates me, is that fact that there's no way of getting registered as an architect if you haven't gone through university. Because with my learning style, I'd much prefer an apprenticeship approach to learning, but there isn't anything that really facilitates that.
Yeah, we will sort of go through that later on, I think. So we might hold that thought for everyone watching, and we'll touch on that a bit later on. I know that what frustrated me at university was disorganized teachers or arrogant teachers, and then the exact same thing with fellow students. Warwick, what frustrated you at architecture school?
Oh, look, that was about 2,500 years ago. All of the above. That I remember that being frustrating. I remember hating design tutors who yelled at their students, as though the students somehow owed the tutors a debt of performance or capability. I hated that. And when I became, and I've done a bunch of teaching over the years, and as a design tutor, I would get frustrated by students who just, didn't bother doing the work, but I never sort of took it personally. It was their own problems that they just get a bad mark. That was like the consequence, essentially. Like, it's fairly clear that the only person you have anything to owe, that you owe is yourself. And I also sometimes hated the disconnectedness of things. Like, they would teach you something in one subject and then like expect you to ignore that in another subject, like, and not sort of try and piece the puzzles together.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of opportunity there for architecture schools, I think. Question 13, do master's programs differ a lot in different countries? If we're studying in a different country, what should we prepare for? I don't have a huge amount of experience with this, but I do know that in many countries, it's still a 5-year bachelor course, which it used to be here. Warwick, did you do the 5-year bachelor course?
Yeah, I'm a lowly Bachelor of Architecture.
There you go. This is how it works. That blows students' minds, I think, that you can have a master's while your boss has a 5-year bachelor. I know it really used to peeve off some of my employers. So that still happens in a lot of countries. And I know the contact hours and workload vary a lot. I have heard that Australian students generally do pretty well overseas, but I think contact load is a big adjustment in some countries, because I only did 12 to 18 contact hours at UC and a lot of homework, but I know in other countries university is a full-time thing. Kyle, have you come across this with any of the people you've interviewed or talked to?
Yeah, so I talk with a lot of students from all over the world, and from what I've heard, there are some minor differences in the master's program, but it always I always just forget that we used to have a 5-year bachelor course. And when I think about it, it's like, yeah, the rest of the world has this 5-year bachelor course and that's all they need for registration. But in Australia, obviously you need your master's for registration, but it's the same amount of time. I was definitely going to say something else about this as well, but I guess what popped up just in my mind then is that if you want to find out about another country, if you want to go travel or something, like we've got a forums on Successful Archistudent where you can just send a message to someone from another country where you want to go, and they're always happy to help out. So that's a resource worth checking out if you want.
Nice one. Yeah, that's really great. The next one really resonated with me. Question 14, why is my architecture feed on Instagram and Facebook constantly filled with memes telling me how stressed I should be about studying and working in architecture? Kyle.
Yeah, I might be a culprit of this. But the main reason why I post memes about staying up late or being stressed is to kind of relate to architecture students so that, they check out my profile and then they can learn about how to counter those problems. But I was actually talking to an A-grade student from Melbourne. His name was Haim. And I asked him, have you ever even done an all-nighter? And he was like, mate, I'm in bed by 9 o'clock every night. And I was like, yeah, same here. Like it really is your decision if you're forcing yourself to be stressed or stay up. And it's really something that you can control.
Yeah, I would agree. I topped my master's and I never did an all-nighter. So yeah, to control that. Question 15, if you're a teacher in an architecture course, which I think Warwick and I both are involved at the university, what would you like to change in your students? I love this question. Warwick?
This is going to sound a little bit harsh. For a number of years, I was teaching first year construction within the architecture course and then fifth year design. So I was kind of seeing people at both ends of the spectrum. And I was often dismayed at some of the students that managed to find their way into fifth year. And I felt like they should have been failed earlier. I would love, and this has got nothing to do with students, of course, it's got to do with universities being more confident in failing people who aren't up to scratch, which is probably not a very helpful answer.
I don't think we need to be helpful. It's all interesting. Mine is definitely sketch more, make physical models more, use the computer less. Yes, working between both mediums is great. But I just get frustrated to death. I'm seeing this more and more. Students just refusing to pick up a pencil and punch out ideas and collaborate quickly. It's really essential.
Let me add something more productive that you just reminded me of. I remember the last studio that I ran, there was some of the students who were doing a lot of their modeling in Rhino and a bunch of students who were modeling in SketchUp. And I developed some insight then, which surprised me a little bit, because when I was at uni, I used Rhino basically for the entire time and loved it. And then when we started our own practice and were working on Macs, Rhino wasn't available on Mac. And so we had to abandon it and shift to SketchUp. And I never really thought about it in terms of this context until I taught students simultaneously who are using both. And this is like, I guess, a little helpful tip for students going through things now. The Rhino students, because Rhino is like quite a plastic modeling interface, you're just kind of making this like gray looking building on a gray background, and then you add materials when you do your renders down the track. It means that the software teaches you how to not care about materials or care about construction or the way a space feels. Whereas SketchUp, as does drawing by hand, I think, makes you feel about the atmosphere of a building and allows your tutor to review not just whether or not, you know, the idea matches the studio brief, but also, is it a great building to be in and does it feel good? And so those students, I felt, always seemed to sort of had a bit of a leg up over their more plastic counterparts.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. Where are we up to now? This was a really personal one. My first year is so overwhelming for me. I feel like I'm not good enough because I didn't do my first semester very well. Should I quit? We had this brilliant professor who used to say, if you don't enjoy architecture that much and you're not very good at it, then there's much easier ways to have a career that's successful and make money. But if you do find joy in it and you have some skill in it, then you can have the most fulfilling and enjoyable career imaginable. And I've never forgotten that, because I think this is just a case by case kind of scenario. Yes, some people probably should quit. Others I know have had breakdowns and gone on to just have brilliant careers. So I think that's a really tricky one. Kyle, were you answering this one?
Yeah. So I get asked this question a lot as well and I've made a few videos on it. I was talking to Anthony Laney, a firm director from LA, and we had a podcast episode not too long ago. He was mentioning something along the lines of, if a student is looking at architecture from this big, wide profession, it's kind of easy to feel inadequate, however you say that. And he was saying how there are so many different aspects of architecture. And if you generally aren't doing so well, maybe you need to go pick a road to go down and get really good at that one thing. And, you know, be the best at that. And maybe that's where you can offer value. And it really comes back to having a long-term goal for the future. That way, like, your temporary shortcomings or failures, they are only a stepping stone to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, nice. Would you add anything, Warwick?
I would say that no one starts off good. everyone starts off rubbish, even if they seem like they're getting great grades. Every single first year student produces a rubbish piece of architecture, probably in their first design studio, that hopefully you will look back on with a kind of a little bit of embarrassment in later years. So as far as quality goes, I think be maybe sort of relieved to understand that even the greatest artists of our era had to start somewhere. And in terms of feeling miserable, I think that's probably more of a deeper issue. Again, I think it's something that plays out over time, that you might have felt miserable because you didn't have a great tutor, and it might be different next semester. And also, like, I know people who just never thrived in the university environment, but got out in sort of struggled through it, got out into the profession, and then found themselves and loved being an architect. So I think that, persevere and see how it hopefully gets better.
Yeah, I'd agree. Question 18, how does a great architect or architecture student manage the balance between social and professional lives? Well, I'm not sure if I'm great, but I manage pretty well by working in a workplace that is managed well and respects employees and work-life balance. So I think, don't settle for less on that. Try and find a good place to work. Kyle, anything to add on that?
Sorry, I missed that question. I was reading the YouTube comments.
How does a good architecture student manage the balance between social and professional lives?
Yeah. Okay. So let me try to find my notes that I had for this one. I think to have a planner and plan out where or when you want to be working and when you want to be social. So, and also, I guess, keeping yourself accountable for that. So if a friend asks you to go out on a Saturday night, but you scheduled in that you'll get your drawings done, it's a good idea to have some integrity and say no. But vice versa, if you've told a mate you'll grab a coffee with them, go do that. You're allowed to have a balance, and that's what a lot of architecture students kind of forget, that they think their life is architecture school, but it's really not.
Yeah. Anything to add, Warwick?
No, I'm good. I'm happy with those comments from both of you.
Good. That concludes the section on studying architecture. Now, Kyle, your website, Successful Archi Student, is specifically for advice for people while they're studying. Can you tell us a bit more about what people can find on the site and what useful items there are there for students?
Yeah, so I've probably touched most of it already, but really it is just the podcast. There's a lot of just great content on the podcast, and that's probably the main thing that gets played on YouTube. And then it's also on any of the audio platforms where you listen to podcasts. And then it's also, I guess, it's a lot of things, but mainly it's the YouTube, podcast, blog, Instagram, Facebook, just, yeah, everything. But yeah, it's that main idea of helping students succeed and network with each other to bring about a community of like-minded students.
Yeah, I think it's so awesome that you started a podcast, and I've been checking out a couple. So I'd recommend any students do check it out, because there's some really insightful conversations on there. We're going to jump into career paths and career planning. So we're going to run through some quick fire questions. Number 19, how do I know what kind of architect I want to be? Well, I would say you work in a couple of different firms and don't pressure yourself to know the answer to that immediately. Warwick, what would you say?
I would say you probably don't know what kind of architect you want to be. I know I didn't when I was a student. Secret is to study abroad if you can, get a job, get another job, and gradually work out who you are and what you want to be. Yeah,
totally. Kyle?
Yeah, I think it's a long-term process as well, as Warwick was saying. But I guess what helped me was to take a day just to analyze yourself. Go drive to the beach or something that is enjoyable, and just ask yourself some questions and write down your strengths and weaknesses, and I guess just interrogate yourself and be truthful, because self-awareness is massively important.
Yeah, nice. Quickfire 20, how do I reduce the risk of losing my job in difficult times? Warwick.
Cool.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. My notes I've taken for this question was be undeniably good. But more productively, if you can, try and find ways that you can help relieve the burden on your bosses. I think people, speaking from personal experience, at the moment, one of the hardest things that we're facing as business owners is that suddenly the demands on our business have just skyrocketed because we have to deal with all sort of the government incentive things. All of our work has dried, a lot of our work has dried up, not all of it, thankfully. But we're also having to grapple with homeschooling and a remote workplace. And so we, all this sort of talk about, I'm going to get super ripped and fit in this like downtime because I've got nothing else to do. I've never been more stretched than I am now. So if you can find ways to relieve the burden of your boss, I think you'll make yourself invaluable.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say work out how you are valuable to the team and bring it, essentially. Turn the page. Question 21. This one really fascinates me. What skills do you think you should have to be particularly valuable in architecture in the future? Warwick.
I'm going to go really pie in the sky on this. I would say learn how to code.
Yeah.
I think the combination of understanding how to navigate the built environment and understanding how to navigate the digital environment would be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, cool. Kyle?
Yeah, I think the question hints towards the answer of to be good at Rhino or virtual reality. But I mean, the core skills relevant now will be relevant in the future. The basics are timeless. So that's good people skills, good technological skills. But I think the one skill you should have is the ability to be open-minded and adaptive. So to not be stuck on learning one software or doing things one way, but to keep your mind open to new opportunities and be fearless of failing as well when trying something new. I think having that mindset will take you really far.
Wow, that's a cracker answer, Kyle. I can't add to that.
Oh.
Question 22. Is interior architecture a good degree, and are there many job prospects at the end of it? It seems like a weird niche between interior design and architecture. Warwick, I know you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's possible that I'm not entirely accurate in this, but my understanding is that interior architecture is the same as interior design, just with a fancier name, maybe. And so really, and as far as I've come across in the workplace, there's no distinction between the two. So if you want to be an interior designer, then that's really what you're talking about being if you study interior architecture. And if that's up your alley, then go for it.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to take a moment here to just remind people that this event is in place of my book launch because thanks, pandemic, I wrote a book, 101 Things I Didn't Learn in Architecture School, and I'm running a flash sale on it at the moment. You can get it 5% off and free postage anywhere in the world. I'm not going to rant on about what's in it because you can get a really thorough preview of the contents and some sample pages. I've popped the link in under the video. So I really hope people can jump on that. We'll talk more about it later in the job. Let's get back into our most popular section, which was about getting a job. We'll run through these next ones pretty quickly. Quickfire question number 23. Why is it so difficult for students to land their first architecture job? I'd say quite simply because there's a lot of competition. But to be honest, we study for 5 years to be effective communicators, innovators and designers. And then I get so disappointed at the resumes and portfolios I receive that just do not communicate effective communication, layout, design skills at all. So I think, yeah, you have to think about what skills you're bringing, and we'll probably get into that more. Warwick, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, look, I really feel for students who are graduating into the workforce and facing the catch-22 of everyone wanting to employ people with a few years of experience and no one wanting to employ people to give them that experience. So I guess, you can be lucky, which means you're striking at the right time and in the right place. And obviously paying attention to all the job boards and submitting for those is really critical. Networking and perseverance are key. There are some other questions coming up about a portfolio. So I want to chat about that, but we might wait for that question because I think that's also a critical way.
Flesh this one out a lot. The next one's quite fun. How did you get your first architecture job? I actually wrote an article on my website about how I've gotten all of my jobs, and I've linked that up underneath the video. The first one was purely through a connection that I'd made being involved with SONA, the student arm of the Institute of Architects, which is partly why I bang on so much about communication and networking and relationships. Warwick, how did you get your first job?
Well, I did a bit of work experience while I was a student in my undergraduate degree. And that, like, I'm talking like almost like a supercharged version of year 10 work experience where I worked in places for a week or two here or there. So that doesn't really count. And that was just about calling up people and asking if they would have me for a week or two for free. Basically, I did nothing of value. I just kind of hung around and learnt. My actual first job came to me through networking and word of mouth.
Yeah.
A friend of mine had been working somewhere and knew that there was a job opening. I interviewed, I got the gig.
Yep. I've gotten all of my jobs in quite different ways, so I won't go through them all now, but if you check out the article, I do cover sort of 4 really different ways that I've gotten each job. And you do have to think about the type of places you want to go and tailoring that. 25, for someone who is a master's graduate but has no work experience, do you have any suggestions on how to land your first job? I would say just apply. It's not necessary to have experience. If you check out, there's a free job seeker workbook on our website that covers a lot of these things, and in the notes under the video. In those, I stress that employers are usually looking for inherent soft skills and the right personality and potential, possibly even more than relevant work experience. Would you agree with that, Warwick?
Yeah. So the number one factor that influences who we eventually employ. So this is not who we interview. People get an interview because their application is great and their portfolio is great. So that means when you're sitting down for the interview, you're already competing against other people who do great work. That gets you in the door. The person who gets employed is the person who feels like they're going to be the best cultural fit. And the way, basically, am I going to like working next to this person 5 days a week for a whole bunch of years? If the answer is yes, then you get the job. From the other side of that relationship, the first thing you can do is to treat your potential boss like a person, which means no dear sirs or madams, no like generic applications, trying to understand who you're applying to and why you want to work there and why they might want to have you working there. Because those are the decision-making matrices that the person sitting on the other side of the table is going to be going through.
Yeah, nice. Anything to add, Kyle?
No, I think that was very well said. I think if I could add one thing, it would be go read Sarah's book, because that's what helped me a lot understand all that. So I'm going to plug
Kyle.
that right there.
I'm going to put a challenge to you guys to answer this one in 3 words. What do employers look for in a great portfolio? My answer would be effective communication, organization, and good design skills.
That was a lot more than 3 words.
Well, 3 things. 3 things. Come
on. I would say great graphic design.
Great. That was 3 words. Well done. Question 27, does a master's degree hold greater significance than a bachelor degree with work experience? This is a really great question. Warwick, what are your thoughts?
If we're talking about a Bachelor of Architecture and not one of the sort of the 3-year qualifications that often universities hand out prior to entering a master's course, but one of the old school versions of a Master of Architecture, they're the same thing. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. My comment was I wanted to comment more broadly on all the different paths that people go through architecture. We've got a real mix in our firm. And again, I think it just comes down to what you know, what you have to offer, and what you're looking to achieve in your career as well. We've got 5 of us did the straight bachelor's and master's route. 2 of us have done TAFE building design and have lots of work experience. 1 has done bachelor's only with lots of work experience, just the 3-year one, and 1 has done TAFE and uni. So across our team, we all have different goals, expertise, and skills. Number 28, have you ever questioned your choice of career because you don't feel you're good enough or worthy, especially if you've taken a while to find employment or your current situation is not what you expect? Kyle, I had you down for this one.
So I can remember specifically back to a point when I lost motivation and I thought it wasn't the right decision. It was actually after my internship and I thought, this doesn't seem right. It just wasn't what I expected. But I took time over a matter of months to understand my idea for the future and how architecture actually plays a role in that. I think going back to what I said before about self-awareness, I think understanding who you want to be is so important. And if you find architecture doesn't have its place there, then maybe it's not right. But if you see yourself in the future and you can use your creative imagination to see yourself working as an architect, I think that will really help pull you towards getting there.
Yeah, great comments. I've completely lost where I am. I'll jump ahead. Question 29. I love this one. When firms say they will hold on to your portfolio for future reference if a job comes up, do they mean it? Do you mean it, Warwick?
We do, because we don't say it very often. And we have actually gotten in contact with past applicants who just applied at the wrong time before. So we've actually done that. It's never worked out though, because inevitably that person was really great and has already gotten a job elsewhere.
Yeah. I am guilty of using this line. And the truth is, if it's a good portfolio, then the answer is yes. And if it's not, then I'm probably just being polite. I did have a friend once who was told there was no work at the moment and to call them back in 6 months. And he called them back in 6 months to the day. And they hired him just because he was so diligent. Number 30, I'm a young graduate with only 1.5 years of consecutive poor professional experiences and 2 redundancies. How do I get a job when I'm so quickly judged by these bad experiences? My answer is simply, you don't have to talk about those bad experiences on your resume. It's up to you to communicate who you are and what your story is. Communicate the positives, and then perhaps if you get an interview, you have a chance to really explain your history. Would you add anything to that, Warwick?
I mean, you want to be careful. One of the things we do look for in portfolios is gaps. What happened in that year? Why is that year not accounted for? So if you choose to just omit those bad experiences in an attempt to paper over them, you might get caught out. That said, I can empathise that it might have had nothing to do with you. It might have had everything to do with poor business management, and yet you were the one who made redundant, and somehow you kind of get blamed for that. And so I think being very mature about the context of that, and certainly not going on a rant about the old boss, is probably a good way to handle it.
Yeah, definitely. Getting into some very timely questions, which I know some of you in the chat are asking. What are good alternate or relevant places to get a job other than architecture practice? Let's make a list. I've said supplier stores like tiles or hardware, labouring on construction sites, professional bodies like the Institute of Architects, media places like design magazines, work at your university, freelance doing rendering or photography or whatever you're good at. Anything to add to that, Warwick?
No, I have just seen that Jenny has
Jenny is in the chat.
Yeah, and I have no idea which point she's talking about now, because I've only just seen the comment. Anyway,
Jenny's my boss, for people who don't know, so you can ask her questions in the chat.
Hi, Jenny, and also hi to Inez, who I saw was on there, who I've met a few times around Melbourne. I can't remember if you mentioned working for a builder.
Yep.
Other trade-based workplaces, but I like your list. I think its thoroughness is great.
Number 32, what can I do if I'm unemployed during the COVID-19 pandemic? I've got an article that I wrote about that below. I'm going to leave it at that. what would your tips be, Warwick?
I heard this possibly totally fabricated story that during some pandemic or another, during the lifetime of Isaac Newton, during which Cambridge University was shut down, he spent a number of weeks in forced confinement in his house, and he invented calculus. So,
wow.
So there's that avenue.
Wow.
But more realistically, assuming you're receiving JobKeeper payments or you're not like having to find other work to allow you to pay rent or eat, then I think, and if you don't have young kids that you need to look after, then this could be an amazingly productive time. And that side hustle you've always thought about doing but never have, like for instance, writing a book about things to help architecture students, or starting a podcast to help architecture students. Those are all things that often emerge out of these sorts of downtimes when you can be creative and free with the amount of time you've got on your hands.
Yeah, I love it. I love the positivity in that one. Number 33, I was hoping to take some time to travel after graduating this year. Well, I hope you still can. Are employers less likely to hire someone who has had some time off? Should I apply for jobs before traveling, indicating when I will be back, or is this unprofessional? I'd say this one's pretty personal. I view travel as a rich learning experience, so I would only view it as a positive. I doubt you'd be successful in lining something up before you go. Usually if someone's hiring, they've got work ready to go, but I'd say it could be worth networking before you go, because you then might be in the back of someone's mind if something's coming up closer to when you're getting back. Warwick?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think traveling is an excellent thing to do. I can't recommend it highly enough. I certainly don't think you're going to be less likely to get the job because you've taken that time off. You've taken that time off to experience the world, which makes you a more mature and well-rounded person. Those are all really positive things for an employer. So I think that potentially increases the chances of you getting employed. I do agree with you that it doesn't, you wouldn't be able to line up a job a year out. Architects don't know what's happening in 6 months or 3 months, a year out.
Yeah, that's right. Question 34, can an architecture degree get you into a job not related to architecture, Warwick?
Sure, absolutely. I know of heaps of examples where people have moved sideways into other careers. For instance, one of the disability access consultants we work with employs someone who studied architecture and landed this job and is now a disability access consultant. Environmental consultancy is also something I know of people who've moved into. Also outside the building industry, into media and sort of the startup entrepreneurial scene. I think architecture is a really great, an amazing education that merges humanities and sciences. It teaches you a worldview that is very caring and flexible and dynamic. And I don't think the architecture profession works hard enough to capture the benefits of people who study this course and then move elsewhere. But we know it happens an enormous amount.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, Warwick. We're problem solvers, communicators, and critical thinkers, which is valued across a lot of industries. I'm in Canberra, and I know the public service is full of people who have done a Bachelor's of Architecture. We'll finish that section with number 35. How do you go about getting work experience when you're still early in your degree? I'm second year. Should I wait? I know there's some comments, great comments on this on the chat line. I don't think it's ever too soon to look for work experience. Personally, I like hiring second or third year students because they already know a bit of software. They can demonstrate some architecture potential, and you can invest in them knowing that they're likely to stick around in their job for the length of their studies. That's my personal take. Jenny, if you're still in the chat, I'd love to know your thoughts. Warwick, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Get in early and often if you can. It will help you understand whether or not you like the career you're headed towards. So that's a win. It will help you test the waters of different different types of architecture practices. And if we're just talking about sort of week or 2 week long work experience periods, at basically no cost to your employer or the architecture practice. And if you're doing it during your holidays or something, at very little cost to you as well. So I think it's win-win.
Yeah. Kyle, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I do think it's just about going out to a firm and just asking. Don't be afraid of no. Just if they say no, ask what you could do differently for next time or what you need to do to be more valuable. Then move on to the next place, because there's always people looking for people doing work experience. And if they say no, you're probably not the right fit anyway, or they're not the right fit for you.
Yeah.
I just want to say a quick story about how I got my first internship, because I think it might be a bit helpful. But pretty much all I did was I found out that my tutor in my first year was running his own firm. And so I just spent extra time during that class and extra time working hard for this class to build up that relationship with him, so that after the semester was over, I could just go up to his firm all dressed up, and I offered to work for him for free and just get some experience with him. And because I built up that previous relationship, when he saw me walk through the door, he lit up and he was surprised and delighted that I was there. But I noticed when I went to a different firm where they don't know who I am, it's a different story. And so I think it's all about building up that relationship beforehand.
Yeah, that's a really clever one, Kyle. I totally agree. I wanted to add a question. George had asked, how did I go about becoming a tutor at university? I know at my university, that's usually about having if you've sort of done well during the studies and you have a good relationship with some of the teachers at the university, you can usually reach out and express an interest. I don't know what it's like down in Melbourne, Warwick, but in Canberra, they're always looking for great, keen people to be involved at university. Is it the same in Melbourne?
It is. I think it's actually quite highly sought after, particularly in a time like now, where even though it's like a lot of online learning, it's still like reliable income and it's a different sector, so maybe not as badly impacted as, say, being in a small practice. I know at Melbourne University, they've democratized the process a bit recently, where each time the application process for tutoring roles come around for the subsequent semester, there's like an online portal that you have to submit through. Even someone who's had prior experience has to go through that process. So, obviously not having that experience is hard. I would recommend making personal contact with the people who you'd be, supporting, like the head lecturers, and then putting your submission in via this portal, these portals that I think are now becoming more widespread, to go through the formal process.
Right, that's really fascinating. Take a little break because I did want to mention, when we're wrapping up that sort of job seeking section, I mentioned earlier that there is a free job seeker workbook on our website. All you have to do is go to the website and it'll pop up offering you that one. It talks you through all kinds of tips and tricks for making that first contact and how to go about it and how to network and all these other avenues that you can find a job. So I'm really hoping people can take advantage of that at the moment if they are job seeking. The next section's going to be on wages and charging fees. But before we jump into that, Warwick, you mentioned at the start that you are on the board of directors for Architeam. What is Architeam and why should young architects know about it?
Well, Architeam is awesome. That's a good start, a good starting point. Architeam started around 25 years ago as a professional indemnity insurance provider. There was a recession around the time, and a lot of small practice architects architects were getting made redundant, and they had to still maintain their insurance. And so Architeam kind of evolved to kind of fill that gap with a cooperative group policy that's much more cost effective than other policies. And then in the intervening 25 years, we've evolved to put on an awards program, run CPD events. We run conferences, provide all sorts of other peer support for members. And we are nimble and energetic and basically very, very strongly focused on small practice architects. that I think there's kind of an impression that in other organisations that support the industry, that sometimes they might overlook smaller practices, but that's Architeam's heartland. And so we do things that make life easier and better as a small practice architect.
Yeah, right. I didn't know that background, so that's great to hear. And you mentioned that you've got the blog and the newsletter. What can students get out of that if they sign up?
Well, I've been writing the blog, panfilo.co, for I think 8 years now, maybe 10 years even. And so there's just hundreds of articles in there over the years that are all kind of gathered together in a contents page to sort of sift through. And there's a lot of stuff in there for students about thriving in a design studio setting, how to find jobs, how to write a good job application letter. So there's a lot of goodness in there to cover a broad spectrum of architects at different stages of their career.
Yeah, there's so much content on there. I really enjoyed it when I was a student because of the insight it gave into architecture practice in a really digestible format. So definitely worth checking out. Where can people find that one, Warwick? How do they sign up?
So panfilo.co, panfilo.co. And there's a sign up page, a sign up section on there, which will send each of my articles direct to your inbox. I'm currently going through a series on COVID-19 inspired articles to help people understand the various government incentive packages, things you can do during your downtime. It was the most recent article I wrote. And I think just acting as a support platform for architects during what's a pretty difficult time for a lot of people at the moment.
Yeah, great. I've just popped that link in the chat for anyone that's watching. Okay, this next section is the one I would have wanted to hear the answers to when I was studying. Question 36, how much do architects get paid at different stages of their career, and how can they increase their earning potential? So I'm going to refer to my notes because I've got the research from the Association of Consulting Architects 2018 salary survey, but also the 2019 Architects Award rates, which sets out the minimum. So the minimum at the moment has the entry rate at 52,500, and the entry registered architect is at a minimum of 60,765. Compare that with the 2018 survey, which compares what's actually happening. It starts at a graduate up to 2 years experience level, and it's got the average at just under 58K. It's then got the registered up to 3 years experience at about 75K. And then it points out all kinds of interesting ones from 100 to 140 for people sort of very senior in firms. Warwick, how can young architects increase their earning potential?
Okay, if we're going to answer that question purely from the perspective of more money and assuming that things like a flexible working environment or other benefits are not what we're sort of focusing on, big practices pay more than small practices.
Yeah, 100%.
That's part of it. Hanging around in a single practice for more years and receiving pay rises over that period of time will pay you more than maybe skipping around to different practices.
That's interesting. I would go against that in my experience, actually.
Okay, explain.
I've seen that friends have actually been able to negotiate more by coming at sort of a fresh negotiation by jumping around, rather than, in my experience, people that had hung around in practices. Probably depends on the firm. Yeah,
look, that's super. I think depending on the firm is probably the critical thing.
Yeah.
I know that when we okay, I've got a naked child.
I can jump into the next question and you can come back, Warwick.
No, all good.
No, you're good.
Yeah. Hello.
Oscar.
Hello.
Sorry. God.
Were you wanting to add to that one, Warwick?
Look, if you're, one of the questions we always ask in interviews is, you know, what's your salary expectation? What were you getting paid at the last place? And we never want to like force people to take major salary cuts when they jump across to us. But the reality is that when you move job, there's probably about a year before you are generating your sort of ideal level of income or revenue for that business. That it takes a year to become, it takes a year to become familiar with the systems of that practice, its culture, and its projects. So that is one thing that will sort of count against you. The other thing, just to keep things moving also, that I would say is that one of the benefits of hanging around for a long time is you can be valuable. And someone who is really valuable to an architecture practice is going to get paid more. And the last thing I would say is project manager. Go do that. That will pay you more.
Yep. One of the emerging architects of the year here in the ACT left the next year to become a project manager.
Oh, really?
And he's doing very well for himself. Continuing on that line of thought, how much did you get paid when you first started and how much do you earn now? So I got quite a shock when I looked this up because when I started 10 years ago, I entered on about the minimum rate, which is pretty common when you're starting out. But that minimum rate was about 39K, so nearly 20K less than it is at the moment, which I just never really registered. I graduated in 2012. I registered in 2014, and I think my cohort at the moment that are tracking on a similar path to me would all be earning between perhaps 80 and 100K. I'm about in the middle of that, and I would generalize by saying those earning less are probably in a role with less responsibility. And reflecting what Warwick said before, those earning more, I think, are in a higher intensity workplace, working on big commercial projects. And I wanted to note in this question that my workplace has a transparent pay scale, which is not that common. So it's a simple table that shows different career milestones. And then we've got that tracking against the minimum award. So we can make sure when the award changes that we're changing to match inflation. But it gives staff a really clear idea of how they can track against certain milestones and also helps us eliminate any bias that's happening in those roles. Warwick, time to share.
Well, my first job was as a student, and I did not have to check because this is seared into my brain forever. My starting salary was $15,000 a year.
Holy moly.
Pardon?
Holy moly.
Holy moly, yeah, Australian dollars. I remember getting a pay rise partway through the year up to $20,000, which I remember at the time was going, oh my God, it's amazing. Post-graduation, I think I was probably paid, I don't know, maybe like 10% above whatever the award was at the time or thereabouts. The meatier part of the question is, what am I getting paid now? Well, I can tell you that I earn less as a small business owner than I could working for another practice.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty common.
Pretty common. The golden parachute is just around the corner. I'm sure of it.
You hang in there for that golden parachute, Warwick. I believe in you. 38. Is it feasible to become director of your own architecture firm? Warwick.
Well, I am.
Point in case.
So, yes. Yes, it is possible. I think that probably a more relevant question is not relevant, but a detail-oriented question is, how would you become a director of your own architecture firm? And I think the thing, I've given a number of lectures at universities over the years, and one of the presentations I gave to architecture practice students on a number of occasions was answering that question. And the secret sauce for any architecture practice is people who pay you to do the work that you do, your clients. And it's something that architecture school does not prepare you in any way to grapple with, to understand how to get them, how to keep them, how to please them, where to look for them, none of that stuff. It is the secret sauce. And if you've got clients, it actually doesn't matter if you're a good or a bad architect, designer, because there are plenty of bad architects out there that are building rubbish architecture and plenty of great ones, but they can all get clients. That's really the critical factor in that question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can either, you can obviously have your own practice and be a director, but I'm at the stage now where I have people I went to uni with are looking at succession planning with bosses that are retiring, and they might step into the boss's boots that way. I'm in a really unique situation where our firm restructured and the architecture leader in our firm left to become a builder. So I'm the practice principal. I'm not the owner or the director. That's Jenny, who's in the chat. She's a building scientist. So we're very unique, but there are those different ways to get through it. As a fresh graduate, how much should you charge for a consultant and concept generation fees? I think this ties back to some of the things we were chatting about earlier. My notes, there's notes on this on Acumen in the Institute's website, which I've linked up. The main thing is if you're doing this kind of work, you are running a business. So you need to work out your fees based on your estimated number of hours for the work you're going to do, what you want to pay yourself, and what you need to charge to cover your overheads like your professional indemnity insurance, your computers, your software licenses, your tax, etc. What would you add, Warwick?
Look, the majority of resources that are out there are focused on answering the equation you just mentioned, working out your costs, working out how many hours it's going to take you, and then sort of multiplying it out to a fee. One of the things from 10 years of setting fees that I have learned is that actually how long it takes us to do something and how much we can charge for that thing are basically have no bearing on each other whatsoever. We charge what we can get away with. And that's another way of saying we charge what the market will pay. And that's based on our experience, based on our how impressive our portfolio is, how excited someone is to work with us, etc., how much we think we're worth, and how many hours it takes us to do it is basically as, you know, the aim is to do it as well as we can in as few hours as we possibly can. And so again, that is like a shifting quicksand that evolves over the life of a project and is again not necessarily connected to what we are charging to do the work itself. So as a fresh graduate, you might start off using those resources and using a calculator to work out what a functioning architecture practice might charge, but knowing that you have basically no overheads and that you don't have much experience to rely on, you can actually deliver that service much more cheaply than somebody else, which is going to be probably your main competitive advantage.
Yeah. We had a good question come up. What can you do once you've completed your bachelor's degree? Do you have the same legal capabilities as a building designer? Essentially, yeah, essentially, yes. The only sort of line for legal registration in Australia is when you become an registered architect. You don't automatically get that from graduating from masters. We're going to talk more about that process in a couple of questions, so hang around to hear that one.
I'll just add to that, in Victoria, it's slightly different.
Okay.
So in Victoria, we
what
have
happens down there?
building practitioners, and one of the categories of that is basically building designer, and another one is draftsperson. So if you have a qualification like a Bachelor of Architecture, like after the 3-year qualification even potentially, and certainly after your 5-year qualification, you haven't done the necessary experience to qualify as an architect, you can potentially become a registered building practitioner. It's a whole nother registration process, but you still have to be registered.
Oh, right. I did not know that. I'm learning as well.
Yep.
Question 40. We are hitting the home run here. Is it wrong for a student to offer drafting services to paying clients? What do you think, Warwick?
No, absolutely not. Again, referring to the Institute's Acumen notes, there is something on there. There's a note on there about answering this exact question. The thing that's important that both the student and the paying clients need to be aware of is that the student is not an architect, does not have the skills or experience or insurance policy that the registered architect would have. So that means the paying client can probably be paying much less to the student than they would be paying someone with all of those things behind them. But they should also be expecting much less. And so you should have, this is critical, the student should have an agreement in place in writing with your paying clients. Any person offering these services should do that. And in that agreement, it needs to say, hey, I am not an architect, I'm a student, therefore you cannot hold me to the same standards as an architect. Please don't sue me if I don't know exactly how the National Construction Code works, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Warwick. Finishing off this section about pay and things, question 41, I was really hoping to ask for a pay rise this year after settling last year on a pay rise that wasn't quite what I wanted, and it wasn't up to par with the industry standard for my level. I also have a feeling I'm getting paid less than my male counterparts. Heavy question. I think there's a lot going on there. I mentioned Parlour earlier in this event. They're a group that brings together really excellent resources and research on equitable practice of architecture in Australia. And for this person, I would strongly recommend they read the guideline on career progression and the one on pay equity. There's really meaty stuff in their guidelines as far as the background, what you can do about it, certain tactics, etc. The link is under the video. In short, you need to have some really good preparation for a productive and open discussion at your next review. And at a minimum, if they show resistance, I'd be discussing the award, asking where they feel you fit within the award, and the sort of experience descriptions, and what performance milestones are they expecting for that pay rise. Would you reflect that, Warwick?
Look, certainly you should always be paid on or above award. Like that goes without saying, or should go without saying. If you're already on or above award and you're asking for a pay rise to take you above that, I think, frankly, it's probably a pretty insensitive thing to be asking of your boss right now, considering that your boss is very likely taking a substantial pay cut because all of their projects might have just dried up. And the fact that you even have a job in an era when we have like rampantly escalating unemployment is a huge win. Whether or not that applies to you, like, is another thing. Like, there are plenty of architecture practices who are not suffering at all because they've got a lot of government contracts. Or maybe we're talking about something that's happening in 3 to 6 months' time when maybe the economy is rebounding a little bit. I don't know. But I think try and put yourself into the shoes of the person who's paying you, and understand whether or not, and try and understand whether or not now is the right time to be asking for that extra cash.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, particularly tricky time to be in that situation. We're going to finish with a couple of questions on registration and some sort of fun questions. But I just want to remind people that this event is a book launch, and it's for my book, and you can preview it in the link under the video. And for the next 24 hours, I'm offering a flash sale of 5% off and free postage anywhere in the world. So I really hope you'll check that out. There's a huge amount of tips related to what we're discussing today. About getting registered, question 42, how do you become a registered architect in Australia, and how does it work if you've studied overseas? I've popped an article that gives more information on this in the link under the video. But to summarise, the Architects Accreditation Council of Australia maintain the national standards of competency for architects in Australia. They run the registration process on behalf of each state or territory's registration board, and the registration board then manages the registration or licensing within that jurisdiction. So in simpler terms, the AACA decide what you need to know, they decide how to test you on that, and then once you've passed, your local board then legally registers you. They make sure that you're conducting yourself appropriately and doing things like professional development, which is only required in some states. The most common route to registration is to graduate from an accredited master's program and then gain experience in preparation for sitting the 3-part registration exam, which is a logbook, an exam, and an interview. However, there are a lot of alternative pathways for those employed overseas with international qualifications who have come through a alternative learning and experience pathway in Australia. And you can find all of those on the AACA website. Following on from that, which I'll ask Warwick, can we log hours of work of your job at an architecture firm for registration when you've completed your bachelor's degree but not your master's? So essentially, can you log hours before you graduate from that master's?
Yeah, you can. I did actually, because I worked as a student of architecture for a year and did that first project for family while still a student. So I think you need to log a minimum of 3,300 hours, which is around 2 years, under the supervision of an architect. And about half of this experience has to have happened, a minimum of 12 months of this experience has to have happened after you've graduated from your master's or equivalent overseas qualification. But the other half, if you want to, can happen beforehand.
Yeah. Thanks for clearing that up. Before we get into those final quirky questions, I'm going to go back to the book a bit. Kyle, I know we've talked a lot about the book and you've read it, and thanks for sticking around with us there. But I wanted to ask what you thought the most useful thing for young architects is about the book.
That's a tough one. If I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say it's that section on technical drawing, because understanding how something goes together is something I struggle with. And I'm also a visual learner as well. So the fact that you've provided drawings for the most common situations students or recent graduates would come across in construction, it's just super easily digestible for me, and I found it super helpful.
Oh, thanks. I found it really hard because there is so much information out there on construction, but it sort of covers all different countries and approaches and a million different ways to do things. And I found it really daunting starting out to work out, well, gosh, what are some of the most common ways, or where do I start with this? So in the book, I really tried to narrow it down to, hey, here's probably the most basic or common way you'll come across, and you should start here. Warwick, you generously provided one of the reviews on the back. Do you think reading this book would make a young architect more employable or valuable in their firm?
Oh, for sure.
I'm glad you said that.
Look, the more you understand about the world of architecture and your role in it, which your book offers in spades, the more valuable you're inevitably going to be to that world. So, of course.
Thank you, Warwick. We're wrapping it up with our final questions. 44, why do architects dress the same? I love this one. And I actually thought about it, and I think because at university, colour kind of gets beaten out of us. Well, that was my experience anyway. It's all about form and function and texture and material, and oh, no, don't you put colour in there. And I think we slowly sort of morph that sentiment into our wardrobes. But I am actively trying to embrace colour more, both in my colours, in my projects and my wardrobe. Kyle, what did you think about this question?
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a cliche, because I've seen architects dressed in many ways. Some offices are casual, some wear, business attire and the traditional clothing. But I think the person asking this probably has in mind that more traditional firm where everyone wears black turtlenecks and black dress pants and suit jackets. But I think the attire of architecture is quite colourful nowadays, and there's a lot more expressiveness and personality and what architects are wearing nowadays.
Yeah, any thoughts on that, Warwick?
I am currently wearing a black t-shirt.
Of course you are.
But I have to stress, this is part of my weekend yoga attire. When I'm dressed for work, I almost never wear black. So, I don't subscribe to the architects always wear black philosophy at all.
Yeah.
And
That's a
strongly
good one.
support the idea of business shorts on sunny days.
Well, I'm yellow at the top, but I've got some active wear on down below.
See, I couldn't be
45.
wearing any pants and you wouldn't know, so I'll keep that quiet. No,
45. Is the architecture field still male dominated? What does gender equity mean to you? And what are you doing to bridge gaps? I love the accountability in this question. Warwick?
Well, I'm currently running an architecture practice of 6 people, 5 of whom are women. So I'm very much outnumbered in my own studio. Gender equity to me means the inevitable future that is coming to architecture practices at different rates, for sure. And some are much slower to adopt that than others. And the bigger end of town, I think, feels much slower than the smaller end of town. But it's an essential thing that we are grappling with and will get better at grappling with as a collective, as a community over coming years. And in addition to having a very gender imbalanced studio towards women, in my role as Archi Team Director, I've now switched portfolios, but for the last 2 years, I was running the conference and events portfolio, and it was just part of the our policy when lining up speakers and showing leadership within the community that we would always maintain as close to gender parity as we could on presentation boards and presentation panels and events as we possibly could.
I think you're muted, Sarah.
I am, thanks. I've got a toddler going to bed in the room next door to me. Kyle, your thoughts on this one?
See, my university was 50-50 in male and female when I started. I don't know how that's sustained as people have dropped out over the years, but I've spoken to students in other countries as well. And I had a girl who had a class of 30 females and 1 male. But then I've also spoken to a guy who had, I think it was 82 males and then the rest were females. So I think it was like 85% male. So it really does depend, I guess, where you're from or what the situation is. But I haven't given this topic much thought as in gender equity and stuff like that. But I think that topic is starting to balance out as time moves forward.
Yeah, interesting to hear those accounts. I've popped in the links, research from Parler. They've done extensive research on this and can very clearly show that it is still male dominated and women still do leave the industry more than men, and that there is still a pay gap. Gender equity to me means more women in senior positions, pay equity, and also work-life balance and flexibility for both men and women, because as I recently realized, it doesn't matter how flexible my role is if my husband's role isn't also flexible. I should note that our firm's also 50-50 at the moment, which we're really proud of. And what have I done? One thing recently is I co-chaired an ACT task force where we brought together 20 directors from the biggest firms in Canberra and essentially crash coursed them through the Parler guidelines, local stories that made everything real for them, and actionable tips that they could put into practice, which was highly successful. Question 46, this is our second last one. Is any design ever truly unique? I'll jump in. Yes, I think every design is unique purely because it's in a different place. And for me, response to place is a core design principle. So my question back to this person, whoever they are, is if the design seems the same, but the outcome is different, does that mean the design is different? Something for them to chew on there. Kyle, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think you made a good point there, but I want to say the opposite. I think
go for it.
It's such a deep level of thinking required for this question, but I think if you've got a design, it's come from an existing thing, because it's like it's based off an object or a memory of something you've previously experienced or seen or heard of. But yeah, I think I could go too deep into this, so I'm kind of keen to see what Warwick says about it.
I'm with Sarah. And in fact, in my notes, I had almost verbatim the first like 5 words out of your mouth, which is every design is truly unique.
Yeah.
And it's not just about being in a different place; it's for different people at a different
good
time,
one.
with different regulatory controls, different climatic influences, different histories, different budget requirements. And if you contrast the work we do as architects to, say, the work of an automotive designer, like a car designer, they design a car and it gets manufactured and prototyped and then refined, and then they build 100,000 of them. Those cars are not unique, but the houses and other buildings that architects design, every single one is changing from site to site to site. So, there's as far apart as they could possibly be.
Brilliant.
I think you've shifted my perspective on that.
Nice one. Question 47, if you could change an aspect of how architecture is viewed from outside of the field, what would you change, Warwick?
I'd love to see us seen as more of an essential service than a luxury one. And the way that will happen is when the public and people outside of architecture consider quality of life as essential as, good quality internet and running water, and access to essential food and services.
Oh, I'm muted again. Kyle?
Yeah, so I think this is an idea I believe is conjured up from within the profession and is seen from the outside. But the idea that architects are above their clients, and I get that architects spend 7 years becoming accredited to work on the things they do, but it shouldn't really give them a sense of elitism or egotism, I guess. But because it is a service-based industry where an architect's ability to work with their clients and many consultants and contractors and stuff like that, instead of above them, it plays a massive role. So I think it's this idea of egotism is the one thing I wish I could change.
Yeah, nice one. Probably on a similar theme, my answer is pretty easy. I wish we were better at communicating the value we offer to the public, and better at delivering all the diverse forms of that value. Anyone interested in that topic, I'd highly recommend reading Flora Samuel's Why Architects Matter book. It is in a link in the article under the video. I've posted my article, Resources for Young Architects in 2020, and it's one of the top books listed in there. That is a wrap on all of our 47 questions. So we did it. And thanks to everyone that commented in the chat, and thanks heaps to Warwick and Kyle. Do remember that there is a 24-hour flash sale on the book, 5% off, free postage anywhere. And a recording of this is going to be available on YouTube. So please share it with your friends. I think it was pretty amazing and valuable. We're going to finish off with I do have one final bonus question. I lied. Is there anything you regret doing as a student of architecture, Warwick?
That wasn't in your primer notes.
No, it wasn't. I'm just catching you on the spot.
Anything I regret doing? Yes, actually, there is one big thing I regret, and that is not doing a semester overseas.
Ah, nice one. Kyle, any regrets?
Not being too far into my journey. I think the one thing I could say is not taking my first year serious enough. But it's a tough one because it's like I kind of showed up late to a lot of classes back then, but I guess making those mistakes has made me more motivated now. So I know that's sort of a regret.
Nice. Yeah. I think mine would perhaps be just not having a bit more fun at university. There's plenty of time to do real world projects, push those creative thinking, problem solving skills while you're at university, and then get your teeth into the real budgetary and site challenges on the job is what I would say to myself. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Warwick. Thanks, Kyle. Please check out the book, anyone, if you're listening, and we're going to leave it there. If you made it this far, well done. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.